Hello. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining tonight. So, again, a very short disclaimer the discussion that we'll be having today and the things that I'll be sharing with you. I think I want to emphasize that it is mainly for discussion, for information and education purpose. Basically, if you need a financial advice, I want to encourage you to look for a professional. You can reach out. We might be able to point you in the right direction. But of course, if you're going to make any decision off the back of what we've discussed, I want to encourage you to do your own research, and I think that's very important. More details about this can be found on our website, and you can also see it on the screen. Okay, so without much ado, I think it's very important that we go into discussion today. And one thing that I want to also emphasize is if you do have a question, please post your question in the chat. I will be checking the chat and I will try as much as possible to answer your question. Again, don't wait till the last minute as the question is coming to you. Even if I will answer it later, do pop it in the chat so we can get the conversation rolling. So again, we are looking at debt management, various forms of debt, repayment strategies, debt management, budgeting, and the concept of avoiding debt for long-term financial freedom, as well as your credit rating. And one of the reasons why debt is very important is that debt comes at an opportunity cost. And what does that mean? It means that if you are so much in debt, there's a high chance of you losing sleep, getting worried. And because you are so much in debt, when an opportunity comes your way, you might not be able to take advantage of it because you're already maxed out. So today's discussion will help you to put these things into perspective, and I hope that we will all live here with something meaningful. So basically, I will be looking at these four quadrants. First, we look at the foundation. We share some perspective about debt. Then we look at some practical actions that you can take. And then lastly, I'll be talking about the available support for you in this journey to debt freedom. So starting with, many of us would have used that word debt number of times, but what does it actually mean? We can define debt as that's your obligation to repay money or even something of value that has been received. So essentially, what this means is you have received something with the obligation to give it back, and most times you don't just give it back, you have to give it back with interest charged on it. So in a day-to-day life, there are, this debt can come in different form. It can come in terms of credit card, it can come in terms of loan, it can come in terms of overdraft, car finance, stock credit, unpaid bills, and even peer lending. So debt is that financially now, debt is that obligation to repay a sum of money back to someone who has borrowed you or who has lended you that money with the expectation that they get some amount of interest for taking that risk of giving you that money. And it's all about around us. Even if you don't want to go into debt, you get adverts here and there telling you, oh, get this debt, achieve your goal faster, and things like that. In fact, it's come so interesting now that we have this buy now pay later, which again is a product that's not taken up recently. And even when you buy things, the shop, the platform is telling you, oh, you can spread the payment over 3 months, over 4 months without paying any interest. So it's everywhere that you go. But the question is, how should you approach it, especially as a believer? How should you approach debt? So again, when we talk about debt, basically it's not just a number that you see on your statement. It's not just a digit or so on your statement. No, it affects your life choices. It impacts your emotional well-being, and in fact, it also impacts your future flexibility. And what does this mean? When you have debt, sometimes it impacts the kind of choice that you can make because you are bound by the demand of the debt. You are bound by the terms and condition of that debt, so you can't really do much in that in that way. In some cases, when the debt gets to a point that it becomes very, very, it becomes maybe a problem debt, as we will call it, or a persistent debt, it begins to affect your well-being. There are instances where an individual will not be able to sleep because they know that they have a burden, a debt that they need to pay. And I remember a couple of years ago, back while we were back in Hong Kong, I got a few people who I might just be in my office, and someone would just call me and say, "Oh, the debtor says they're going to call my boss, and when they call my boss, I'm going to lose my job, and if I lose my job, I can't support my family back at home, maybe in the Philippines or even in Nigeria." And that was a very intense moment because they are under, financial pressure, the financial worry, and that causes emotional, impact their emotional well-being. And the third aspect of it is that when you are in debt, or you have this repayment obligation, even if there's an opportunity for you to invest in a business, to do something else with that money, because you're already tied down with the repayment, there is no capacity, there is no bandwidth to invest, to even increase or grow your wealth. So that is comes with an opportunity cost, and I think that's one thing that we need to bear in mind as well. So in today's conversation, I've mentioned debt, I've mentioned this different types of terms, but I think that it's very important that I quickly define some of these terms. One of it is loan. So loan is a type of debt where you have been where you have been given, for example, by a lender a specific amount of money, and with the agreement to repay this money over time. This type of loan can be gotten from bank, credit union, even online lenders. And many people can use this loan for buying a house, for financing education, for example, student loan, or even starting a business. So you get a sum of money with the agreement that you will pay this back over 3, 4, 5 years, 20 years, and you are also paying interest. So the interest is that sum of money that the lender gets from as a result of giving or borrowing you that particular amount of money. Now, the other one that is also very important is when we call what we call leverage. Now, leverage as a term, I know many of us would have heard it. It simply means using borrowed funds to amplify an a return. So you use borrowed fund in order to be able to amplify or increase what you can get as a result of you using that money for a meaningful purpose. For example, many people rent a house. The landlord of that house, for most times, the landlord have they borrowed a sum of money from the bank, like in terms of a mortgage, and then in that case, the landlord might have just have 25% deposit. In order to buy a house of 100, say 100,000, they might just have 25,000. The bank borrows them 75,000. That 75,000 that they have borrowed is what we call leverage, basically. Then the next one is credit card. Many of us know this, and this is a form of money where a financial institution gives you a card, so such that you as a card holder can use a predetermined level of amount of money for different purchases and different use. And again, there is also that requirement for you to repay the borrowed amount over time. And in some cases, you can pay in full. Sometimes they encourage you to pay minimum payment on a monthly basis. However, it is very important to emphasize here for you as quickly as possible that credit card is not a free money. You have to pay back the money, and then there is an interest that is charged if you do not pay back the full balance at the end of the month. So it's very important to pay attention to this. Now, the other type of term or a form of debt that we mentioned today, we'll be talking about is the buy now pay later. And I've mentioned this a short while ago, that buy now pay later is a short term financing where you are allowed as a customer to buy something or buy an item and pay the amount or the cost of that item over the course of 3 to 4 months. And there are so many of them now. We have ClearPay, Klarna, and so on in the UK. And this is very common now. If you go on Argos, Corey PC World, in fact, even up to supermarket for food, you can see those kind of payments there. But again, if you pay back in 3 to 4 months, as depending on the terms, you would not be charged any interest. But if you miss a payment, then you can incur a fee, or you charge an interest because you did not pay back when you agreed to. Then the other one that is also very interesting is peer lending, and this is where individuals, you lend money to each other within your sphere. So, for example, a friend borrows another friend a sum of money, and this is usually done within a close community. And there are also online peer lending systems are all around, but the idea here is it boycotts any form of traditional intermediaries like a bank, a credit union. It's just like individual dealing with another individual, and sometimes it comes with a specific amount of interest, sometimes it doesn't come with interest, so it depends on the arrangement. Now, the other word that is also common that I think we'll be mentioning is default. And what does it mean? Defaulting means that a borrower has failed to make a timely payment on their financial obligation. And this means that they are violating the terms of the agreement. And when you default in terms of your credit agreement, it comes at a cost. You can have a late payment charges, or you can even damage your credit rating, and that can also lead to a form of legal action. So defaulting means that you fail to pay back what you have borrowed, and that has a lot of consequences on your personal finance. Now, again, for many of us in the Bible, you might have heard of usury. It's not a word that is used very frequently these days, but it means charging excessive interest, in order to make profit. That, and this can the profit that an individual will be making exceed any level of acceptable risk. A couple of years ago, when there were people, someone needs money to maybe pay school fees or something, and then someone else is offering them, interest, a peer-to-peer lending kind of system, and the interest rate is so astronomical, sometimes 300%, sometimes 100%, and you are wondering, how is that even feasible? So when you charge an excessive amount of profit that does not reflect the risk that you are taking, then it becomes usury. Now, we will also talk about debt consolidation. This is where you bring all your different smaller debt into one single debt, whereby rather than having two or three repayments, you only have one repayment for your debt. Then credit rating, which we'll be talking about also, is a system where that assess an individual or even an organization or even a country's credit worthiness. That is, this indicates maybe the likelihood of you being given credit. So your credit worthiness as an individual depends on your credit rating. Now, I know many of us would have heard about credit score before. So credit score is a numerical value or representation of an individual's credit worthiness. So there is no single credit score for an individual. It depends on who this credit the agents or the agency that is creating the score. They have different numbers. For example, you have Equifax, you have Experian, you have TransUnion. They have different numbers that they use, different system, and even different banks have their own different way of checking your rating. So I think ultimately, when you compare credit rating and credit score is just a number. It doesn't really matter that much. What matters is your credit rating. However, your credit score can sometimes reflect the level of your credit rating. So they go tandem, but the number itself does not mean much. But what you should focus on is on the credit rating itself. Okay, so let's talk about types of consumer debts. Okay, now I've mentioned different some of these, but I'll just summarize it here. There are different types of consumer debt. Some of them are secured debt. And what does that mean? It means that the borrower has pledged something of value to back up the debt. So when you have a secured debt, for example, if you take a car loan, the car itself can be used as a collateral for that loan. What that means is if you fail to keep up with the payment, the car can be repossessed, sold to cover the lender's liability in that case. Then another one is the mortgage. Mortgage is a secured kind of debt in the sense that the house is acting as a collateral. So if an individual fails to keep up with the payment, the house can be sold in order to pay back the loan or the amount borrowed. The other ones are the unsecured debts. So, for example, you can have your credit card, your personal loan, buy now, pay later. These are the kind of debt that are not tied to any tangible asset or anything of value. So it means that it's a high risk form of lending, even for the lender. In this case, they are just checking and saying, will you pay back? Will you not pay back? But even if you don't pay back, there is a likelihood that you will damage your credit, but then the lender might not have anything to take from you in order to recoup their money. Now, there is a growing debt burden, especially in the UK. When I last had this webinar about 2023, for example, these numbers that you can see on the screen, they've all gone up. So, for example, the average household in the UK has a credit card debt of 2,735. And what that means is if you put everybody together, sum up the amount borrowed and divide it by the number of people, every household in the UK will have at least this amount of debt if you distribute it across everybody. And what that means is some people will have zero, yeah, some people will have 10, some people will have £100, some people will have £30,000 on credit. So again, there is a growing credit card debt, and this amount has grown and it keeps growing as the cost of living crisis continue to increase, such that people are now struggling to even meet their basic need as a result of the amount that they earn, for example. So the debt is growing, debt burden is growing, and the interest rate is also increasing. So the amount of interest that is being charged on debt is also increasing. And for adults in the UK, there is, up to £4,455 being owed by individual, and this is causing a lot of challenges for people because again, there is an opportunity cost, there is emotional pressure, and that is also leading to breakdown in family, because if the conversation cannot be had, then people just give up basically. And so this is something that is very huge and is happening all around us. And if you look at the newspapers, it's all there about the growing debt burden, where people are now even struggling to pay bills and they are just paying the minimum on their credit card. So they say recently FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, actually made a report, and they talked about the fact that 1 in 5 adults in the UK has what we call a persistent debt, credit card debt. This means that they are only paying the minimum, and the amount they are paying is not even covering the loan. It's the debt is only paying for the charges and the interest that is being charged. And if that continues, it means that that individual can be held in that loop for another 10 years, another 20 years, and that's not where we want to be. Okay, so let's carry on. And there was this book I read some times ago. It's called The Psychology of Money. It's a book that I will highly recommend to anyone joining this call. And it's the author, Morgan Howe, says doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are, but has a lot to do with how you behave. So for you to do well with money, it's not just about how much you earn. It's not about how smart you are, whether you have a doctorate or a bachelor's. No, it's about how you behave. So there are certain behaviors that can cause, persistent debt, that can cause debt problem for individuals. For example, if you engage in impulse buying, that is, you just see something nice, you just say, I just must have this. That is and you cannot resist it. You just want to go get what you want now and now and now. And it means that you are not planning. Sometimes even the things you've bought, you have an alternative somewhere in the house. And this can become even a problem when there's an emotional issues. When you are struggling emotionally, you spend money, and because you have spent money that you don't have, your emotional state gets worse and you spend more money. So again, those are hidden behaviors that can be said to be behind debt. The other one is comparison. This is often called keeping up with the Joneses, right? You see your neighbor just bought a new shiny 2026 car, and you are wondering, but God, why? What's happening with my life and destiny? And because of that, you also want to buy a 2026 car, but then your income does not support it. So you want to buy a very nice car, but you're not earning a very nice amount of money. So what happens? You go into debt, and that leads to frustrations here and there. The other one is disorganization, and this one is very subtle, but it's very powerful. For example, you go into debt because you missed a bill. Now, you did not miss a bill because you did not have money. You missed the bill because you did not know that a bill needs to be paid on a particular date, and as a result of that, you miss that payment. You get additional charges for missing a payment, and before you know it, the interest accumulates because you have not paid back, and these things adds up, and it gets to a point that an individual now gets to a point that they cannot even open their bank app anymore because they feel like, oh, what am I going to see there? And disorganization also includes someone moves a house. When you move a house, it's part of organization to say, okay, what address or what are the mails that I need to change address on, your bank account, your council tax, and things like that. You might change 5 and you forget one. The one you forget, if you have a kind of credit agreement and you do not see the reminder to pay, then you can lose, you can then default on that payment. And I think here, the organization can save you a lot of headache, and that's why it's good to keep very good record. I think the last one that we will consider is when an individual begins to hope that the problem disappear without taking necessary action. For example, many of us are Christians, and there is that element of hope, that element of assurance of a better future, but that the Bible tells us, right? The scripture encourages us and tells us about that is awaiting the destiny of God's children. But if you continue to hope and you are not making effort, hoping that your debt will go away, hoping that your lender will forget about you, and these things can go a long way to even compound the debt problem that an individual is having. So again, when you then go to the mountain and you are praying that, God, please let my lender forget me, let the debt be wiped clean, even if God do answer that prayer, then because you have not learned a lesson, it's possible that you go back into the same circle again because no lesson has been learned. So it's very important that you don't hope that the problem will go away. You need to face the problem head on. And some of the principles that we'll be sharing by God's grace tonight should help you to get better at these things. So being honest with yourself, tracking your expenses, and sometimes being patient, can be a very good way to achieving a debt freedom. All right. So again, just to remind you, if you do have any questions as I'm talking, please post on the chat, and we would I'll take your question. Now, there are several viewpoints about debt, and I think this is very important. I've talked about people taking loan to buy a house, or even to for student loan, for example. But then, is it all bad? Is there different views about debt? And I think one of them is to view debt as a burden. So, for example, someone might say debt is a burden, so don't go near it. Here, you can say, oh, debt is very harmful, is very dangerous, and don't even have any form of debt. And there are people who hold this viewpoint. For example, for some of us who might have heard of Dave Ramsey, for example, people is a personal finance expert, and he wants people to, just you can come to the radio show to shout about your debt free status. No, so for people like him, no debt at all is a mantra. And again, in that way, that is the school of thought that they hold on to. Now, there are other school of thought that can view debt as a tool. And here you are considering debt as, for example, you borrow a sum of money to finance your education, to start a business, or even to expand your business with a clear plan on how to repay it. So such people can take debt as a tool. And an example of this is what, for some of us, we might know him, called a man called Robert Kiyosaki, and he's the author of the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And he's of the opinion that you can take debt to invest or to in income generating assets. So for example, you buy a house, you rent the house out, you're getting rent, you're paying back the mortgage or the interest on the mortgage, and the difference goes into your pocket. So in that way, it considers that as a good use of debt. Now, again, those are two school of thought. Would we say the one is right, the other one is wrong? Is there a way whereby we can approach this objectively and with contextualization? And that is where we can also see from the Bible what the Bible has to say on debt. One of the scriptures that is very important here is that Proverbs 22 verse 7, the Bible says the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And here it just simply means that there are people that all they live on is the interest from the people, other people pay them because they have borrowed them a sum of money. And what that means is the person who borrows is working so hard to meet up with their repayment in order not to default, but the person who borrowed them the money is smiling to the bank because they are doing very well. And that's why you see banks declaring profit of billions of dollars, and you are wondering, but how? It's as a result of the interest people pay. And the person who is paying the interest is working very hard to keep up. The person who is receiving the interest is smiling. So again, here is a biblical understanding that for us as believers, we must be cautious and we must exercise wisdom when it comes to debt. And of course, if you look at the Bible as well, in the book of 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 36, verse 3 to 36, here the Bible tells us of the story of a prophet and a widow. And this widow came to the prophet Elisha and said, look, my husband, your servant, is dead, and he has a lot of debt, and the debtors or the lenders are coming to want to take our children for as slaves. And as a result of that, what happens? The woman was under immense pressure, and until she got the deliverance, the pressure was just so much because she has lost her husband. She can as well lose her children to death. So it is very important that the Bible here does not necessarily tell us that, I'll outlaw any form of borrowing. It's just telling you that you must be very apply wisdom when it comes to borrowing, because again, the prophet said to the woman, go and borrow vessel, and borrow not a few. So in that case, you can borrow certain things as long as what you are using them for is something productive, something meaningful, and not just to spend on your consumption or for your self gratification, basically. So again, here we can see different viewpoints about debt. And as an organization, Keep Steward, we advocate for a contextual view. If you come to me, for example, or the organization and say, I'm looking to borrow certain amount of money to buy a house, and then we can have a conversation. Can you meet up with the payment? Or if you want to borrow money to then say, I want to buy a 2026 car and I feel like I can afford it, then the first question that we begin to ask you is, so after you got the car, what next? Because some of these things are decisions that you need to contextualize and weigh carefully. And it's not just about whether you get the loan or the borrowing. It's also about how much interest you will be paying on that amount. So the decision you make has to be balanced, okay, and contextualized depending on where you find yourself. So basically, we can say there are two categories of debt. We can say the good debt and the bad debt. And here we would say, what is the long-term impact of this debt on you as an individual? Will the debt improve your financial well-being? Will it help you to achieve your long-term goal, or will it impact you negatively? So if you borrow, for example, to buy an asset like a house, for example, then we can say, oh, that's a form of a good debt, because the asset can pay back the debt itself without overextending you. If you decide to take a student loan to further your education, for example, get an MBA, and because you have an MBA, you can now earn more, increase your earning capacity, then by all means, we can say, yeah, that's something to do. If you want to borrow or get a business loan to expand your business such that you can now go global, then by all means, as long as you know that the return will be there, then by all means, go ahead. But again, you always need to check, is this a good investment? Will the investment be able to repay itself, over time? And is this a long-term value such that it doesn't diminish over time? So those are some of the things you need to consider. Then the other one, when it comes to bad debt now, is like you are borrowing to buy or to spend on non-appreciating asset or short-term consumption. So for example, you are borrowing on credit card just to, the latest iPhone 17 is out now, and you want to buy iPhone 17 Pro Max, and you don't just want to buy the 256 gigabyte one. You want to buy the 1 terabyte one, whereas you don't even need the extra storage, and very importantly, your current phone is still working. So again, when you begin to make such a decision, the long term, the value of the phone will depreciate. Long term, it can even be stolen, or you drop it and it damages, and then you have to start over again. The asset cannot repay for the loan. Then you can begin to say that is a form of a bad debt. So it is very important that you pay attention to this thing. Then what are the other characteristics of a bad debt? One, it has a high interest rate. So for example, someone might be borrowing and paying back 40% for example, especially when you're in your overdraft. The overdraft in the UK is like 39% now. So you think about it, 39%, and you spent the money already, but you are paying 39% back to the bank, and there is no savings account that will give you 39% as at today. So in that kind of instance, you can see that what you have spent the money on is not an appreciating asset. The interest rate is high, and that again tells you that this is a bad form of debt. And again, it's very important that we pay attention to these things. Sometimes we take loan because we want to dine out, because we want to feel good about ourselves. And it's good to spend money as long as you have it, but not that you borrow so that you can spend shortly, and then 5 days later, all the good vibes and the feelings that you have from spending that money is all gone. So it's always very good to find that right balance. Okay. Now, again, in the chat, if you can tell us what other example of good or bad debt, that would be very good. So, in the next few minutes, we'll be looking at the practical tips on how to deal with debt. And I think it's very important to emphasize that the goal the goal is not merely to pay eventually. It's also important that you pay intentionally. And when you have the opportunity, maybe you earn more, or you increase your earnings, or you got a extra payment or extra income, make sure that you are aiming to pay down that debt as fast as possible. And this can help you to keep the motivation high to get to that freedom from debt, such that you can then use that income or that extra money for something meaningful as well. Okay. Now let's carry on and look at some of the ways that you can deal with debt. And this part again is very important for someone who is already having a form of debt or a sort of debt that they are struggling with. Okay, and again, there is no judgment, but I believe if you listen, you can then begin to take some actions in that direction. And I think the first one is for you to start with a complete list of your debt. So if you have a card finance, if you have a credit card debt, 5 credit card, first and foremost, write down a list of these debts. Write down what the interest rate on those debts are. Then begin to check what and how can you approach, getting rid of this debt. Because again, if you don't write it down, if you don't have a record of it, then you might not be able to to manage it. Because again, whatever you cannot track, you cannot manage. So like the Bible says in the book of Luke chapter 14 verse 28, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it. So you must, first and foremost, to deal with any form of debt is to write them down, check the interest rate, write the name of the lender, what is the current balance as of today, what is the interest, the minimum payment, what is the due date, and write down the rate on maybe a spreadsheet or even on a sheet of paper. And by once you have it right in front of you, then you can then begin to think, where do I go from here? You might discover that even the debt that has the highest interest rate, that is nearly doubling every couple of months, is one that you can pay back even today. So, but if you don't write them down, you might not know where to go, or you might just be doing things as you have always been doing. So I think it's a good idea. Write down those debts, both 0%, both 50%, 30%, however the percentage. Write everything down and then begin to check, where do you go from here. Then I think the other thing you can then do is to write down the payment date. I think this payment date is very important in the sense that you don't want to miss a payment and then begin to add more to your debt. For most credit cards in the UK, if you miss a payment of £1, they will charge you £12. If you miss a payment of 1,000, they will charge you 12 pounds. That's the late payment or charges for missing your payment. But then they will add it to your current balance, and if you do not still pay it back, then the interest will be charged on both the principal and the charges as well. So it's just continue to accumulate and build up. So it is very important that if rather than missing a payment and then having to pay interest on the missed payment, have maybe a system using a calendar, for example. Have it all recorded, the date that the payment is due, when it is due, and check your bank account a day before to make sure that there is enough money there in order for you to be able to meet that payment. So again, write out all your debts. There's no shame about it. Write it down, then begin to check, where do you go from here. And some of the principles that we'll be discussing next can then become what you apply one after the other. Not everyone will apply to you, but then there are some that you can then use that are beneficial. Now, number 2 is that you must create a budget. Now, the Bible says the plan of the diligent leads surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty come only to poverty. And the emphasis here is that the plan of the diligent leads surely to abundance. So you must have a plan. You have written down your debt. Next is, how do you want to pay back that debt? And here you need a budget, in the sense that by having a table that shows what your income is, what your expenditures are, then you can then see, are you bringing in enough money to meet your obligations, maybe for your rent, mortgage, food bills, groceries, and so on and so forth. If your income does not meet your current expenditure, then probably that is the reason why you have debt, or in the first place. Now, what do? You have two options. Either you increase your income or you reduce your expenditure. So it means that you might need to cut back on certain tastes. You might need to cut down on eating out, on doing some things, in order for you to have a clarity and in terms of where your money is going. So it is very important that we prioritize what those important expenses are. For example, your council tax, for example, your rent. Prioritize those things, and every other thing that are not so important, that will I die if I don't if I don't eat out this week? And the answer is definitely not. So no. So in that case, you can ignore or let go of that expenses and then use that money to pay down part of your debt as well. So again, when you are in the phase of paying down your debt, someone says that the only time we should see you in the restaurant is if you are working in the restaurant. If you are paying down debt, then you should not be seen as in the restaurant eating out, because again, it's just a way of disciplining yourself such that your expenses are not increasing, whereas your income has not increased. And for many people, income has not really gone up in the UK recently, because again, there are so many economic factors. So the only way your income can continue to meet your needs is by cutting back on certain expenses. Okay. Then the other one that is also very important is that you must build an emergency fund. Now, emergency fund is that pot of money where you have set aside in case something happen. So the Bible says this wise stores up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. Proverbs chapter 21 verse 20. And what this means is you need to have a pot of money such that if anything do happen, you have that money to fall back on rather than going back into debt. And for example, you can start by having a sum of £1,000 in an easy access bank account where you can access it within a couple of minutes or hours, so that you can have access to that money to cover an emergency without necessarily having to borrow more. And again, you've seen people who maybe they drive car for work, and then the car has failed MOT because of some things, and they need to fix that for another £400 before the car can be back on the road. They need the car for work. The car fails MOT, needs £400 of work to be done, but then they have no money anywhere that they can fall back on. What next? Is that they go borrow on the credit card, or they go borrow from payday loan, which is at maybe 100% plus, to be able to meet that expenses. Whereas if you have gotten maybe a £1,000 emergency fund, you can dip into that, use it for that car, then you can start replenishing your emergency funds again. Or some people will say, well, the car failed MOT for £400. Okay, fails an MOT, you need to fix it for 200 for £400. Now you don't have £400, but then you think, okay, maybe the best thing to do is to scrap the car for £150 and then go and get a brand new car with an expenses of maybe £250 every month. Whereas in the past, you don't have any £250 obligation. But now that you have gotten a new shining car, you cannot sleep because you have to pay £250 even when you don't have it. So it is about finding that right balance such that you have a sum of money somewhere that you can fall back on when things do break down. And to be honest with you, brothers and sisters, things do break down. And again, once you get to a point that you have £1,000, everything is going right, then start paying down your debt. After which you can then increase your emergency fund to 3 to 6 months of expenses, depending on the stability of your job. Okay, so next one is about living below your means. And the Bible says, Proverbs 15:16, better is a little with the fear of God than great treasure and trouble with it. So here we must contribute contentment. If your income increase and your taste also increase, then you might end up finding yourself in what we call the lifestyle creep, where as your income increase, your taste increase. Now you can no longer shop in Aldi. You are now thinking maybe you should start shopping in Waitrose, because again, you now earn more money. But again, if you're not careful, you find yourself that as you are earning more, you are spending more, and there is nothing to fall back on. So it is very important that we aim to live below our means, and by so doing, you can invest the rest, and the investment that you have can then go ahead to be in a position to support you in the future, uh, maybe 10 years time, or even at retirement. Next is to practice delayed gratification. And I think here it can be sometimes easier said than done, but I think it's very important that if you have a budget and you have said, look, in my budget, there is no room for any form of, okay, I just need it now and I must get it now, then you know that you need to plan for it. You want to buy a new jewelry, you need to buy a new set of wardrobe, you need to plan it. You don't think about it this month and you have to have it this month. Again, the question is, if you don't buy that new clothes, will you die? You might not die. So in that case, it is very important that you find a way to strike that balance, because again, buying it and not being able to repay the money can give you a lot of financial pressure. And when you are having financial pressure, it leads to stress, and before you know it, you have heart palpitation, you have you have depressions here everywhere, because things that could have wait, well, you just want to have it immediately. So it is very important that you take your time, check, is this something that I really need, or is something that can wait? If it can wait, let it wait. If you think it's something that is very important that you must have it, then you can check, oh, is there a different way of getting it without spending too much money? And thank God for the likes of Vinted these days. Again, I'm not advertising Vinted, but I'm just saying that you might be able to get what you want even for a low price if you decide to go to a charity shop, or even try to get a second hand of the same thing. And again, you just have to find that balance. And the reality of it is, when I talk to people, one of the things I say is, what doesn't seem to be enough today will eventually be more than enough in the future, as long as you are patient, and that is very important. Patience is key in being able to do well in your personal finance. Next is to avoid high interest debt. And we've read this scripture before. The Bible says the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And what this is actually saying is, if you have a high interest payment, you keep trying to pay it down, but because the interest is increasing more than the amount you are paying, then it just continues like a cycle. And again, this is what we call the persistent debt, such that you are paying the money, but the charges, the interest is more than the amount you are paying. And as a result of that, it simply means that you are now finding yourself in a place that you are just going round and round and round the cycles, and this loop. And that's why it is called persistent debt. So here you must strive to avoid a high interest rate loan. I remember reading a story a couple of years ago. There was a guy, he was a banker, and bankers, for example, in London, investment bankers, they earn 100,000 plus. But this guy, he spends money so badly that he will, before the end of the month, he will need to get a payday loan to be able to get by for that month. Imagine you are earning 100K and you are still having to go to a payday loan to be able to, to meet your obligation for the month. And that is the challenge, because sometimes the payday loan can be as high as 1,000%. It's ridiculously expensive. And so you don't want to find yourself in that place. So it is very important that you avoid carrying over balance. So if you are going to use a credit card and you're going to spend on your credit card, it is very important that you pay off the balance in full by the end of the month. And to save yourself the hassle of missing the payment, set up a direct debit. Make the direct debit one day after your payday. For example, if you are paid on 30th, let the direct debit be on the 1st, so that you don't miss that payment. The money goes out of your account as soon as it's there, such that you don't have to deal with having to miss payments. So try and work out, maybe if you have 10 direct debits, try and get everything to go out on the same day, so that you know that whatever is left in your bank account, in fact, after, of course, giving, after you have saved, is what you have to spend. And once you spend what you have to spend for that month and the money is finished, sleep and thank God for the gift of life. And then the next month you earn more money, then you can start, life continues. So again, essentially what we're saying here is take it easy, okay? Step by step, line by line, and eventually you will achieve your goal. But again, you need to keep making sure that you are making the right decision, you are making the right call on a consistent basis. Okay. Thanks for everyone who's posted in the chat. All right. So there is a question here which we'll come back to. I'll just um, give that a thumbs up. Yeah, so someone talks about car financing being a bad debt because it is a loan for depreciating asset, and this is very interesting. And again, we can also look at it in two dimensions, right? If you go today and you go to the forecourt or to the dealership and you buy a brand new car, the interesting thing is as soon as you drive the car out of the forecourt, if you change your mind 5 minutes later, it's no longer a brand new car, it's now a used car. And as soon as you drive it off, it loses maybe 10, 15, or even 20% of the amount you bought it for immediately. So it's very important that you now begin to check, do you buy a brand new car or you buy a new to you car? So you have to find that right balance there between and how you spend that money. And again, there are debts, okay, incurred due to unforeseen or emergency circumstances, and this is where having an emergency fund becomes very important. Okay, thank you to everyone who's contributed. We'll come back and take more questions shortly. Now, in terms of repaying your debt, I think the very important thing here is that you should prioritize your debt repayment. If you don't want to, if you want to deal with the debt, then even in your budgeting, you need to prioritize your debt repayment. Now, there are people that they got to a point that the debt is so much that they just zoom off or just tune off and say they are not paying back the debt. Again, that's not a place to be. You want to make sure that you are prioritizing your debt, because even the Bible says the wicked borrows and do not pay, but the righteous shows mercy and give. So again, if you don't want to be called the wicked, you must pay back your debt. There is no two way about it. So there are different strategies to repay your debt, which we will focus on the next couple of minutes. And the first one is what we call the snowball method. So this is where you pay your debt like a snowball. You pay the smallest balance first, and then if you have 5 debts, now this is where, remember, point one is for you to write down your debt. Now that you've written down your debt, you know what the interest rates are, you know what the amount of the debts are. Now, in order to repay them, one of the things you can do is to use two strategies. One is this debt snowball. Here you pay the smallest balance first, pay it off, then whatever amount of money you are using to pay the smallest balance, you now divert it to the next smallest balance, such that the other debt, you are paying what we call the minimum payment on all others, but you focus on the smallest balance. And the idea here is, if you have 5 debts, you pay one off, it feels good psychologically that now out of 5, only 4 is left. Whereas it might just be that one is only £1, the others are £20,000. But there is a psychological feeling that comes with, oh, I no longer have 5 debt, now I have 2 debt. And then the amount that you are paying off towards that debt, we can now use it for the next smallest one, and you continue in that cycle such that you keep paying the smallest off continuously until you eliminate the entire debt. Now, that is this debt snowball. The other one is what we call the avalanche method. And here is to focus on paying off the debt with the highest interest rate. And the idea here is, if you are not careful, if you have a debt that is at a very high interest rate, maybe 40%, 100%, that is doubling more quicker than even your other debt. So the priority is to focus on the one that has the highest interest rate and pay the minimum on others, such that when you get rid of the one with the highest interest rate, it means that at least your debt is not doubling or increasing faster than you are repaying it, then use that money to pay on the next one with the next highest interest rate. So you continue in this way consistently until you eliminate all your debt. And this, I believe, is very strategic in the sense that you are making progress, but then because the progress you are making is giving you some psychological boost, then you can carry on getting rid of the debt consistently. Now, another approach is for you to do well. If you have credit cards and you are paying interest on them, then the next thing you can do is to do what we call the balance transfer. And balance transfer here means that if you have two credit cards, for example, with 1,000, 1,000, 5,000, however the amount is, and you are paying interest on it. Again, the key thing here, you are paying interest on that balance. Then what you can do is to apply for another credit card that has a 0% rate on it. So there are credit card now that has 0% rate for as long as 38 months, maybe until 2028. And what that means is you transfer the balance on the cards that you are paying interest rate on into the one that has no interest until maybe 2028, and then you then use the money that you have been paying on those existing card to pay back or the new card, such that rather than paying interest on two cards at the moment, you are only paying back the amount borrowed on a new card without paying any interest on those cards. So that's what we call the balance transfer. Now, balance transfer comes with a fee. Sometimes it can be £4, well, 4.99%. It can be 5, it can be 2.99%. Some have no fee, but the time will be shorter. So you have to find a balance between, should you go for a no fee 12-month card, or should we go for a 4.99% card for 38 months? So you need to make sure that when you are doing a balance transfer, the amount you are transferring, you have enough to pay back that amount within that space of the balance transfer. And one way you can save yourself headache down the line is the cards that you have transferred for, close the account. Okay, the card you have transferred the balance from, close the account. Otherwise, the more access to credit you have, if you are not careful, the more temptation you have to spend more money. Okay, because you might say, well, I have 7,000 here, I have 5,000 here, and then you are spending money that you do not have. So if you think that you will spend it, take, I mean, close the account. If you think closing the account will be difficult, put it inside a freezer bag, pour water into it, put it inside your fridge or your freezer, let it freeze there, but then make sure you don't have it on your Apple Pay or even on your Google Pay, so that you don't still spend it. Again, you want to take it out of sight such that it is not at your reach for you to spend on, and then focus on paying down the debt that you have transferred. Now, in some cases, you might have loans that you are paying maybe 20%, 40% on at the moment, or even payday loan that you are paying 50, 100%, or even 1,000% APR on. Those kind of loan, as long as you have the income to support it, you might want to get another loan, maybe at 8% or 10%, and use that to pay off the higher interest rate loan, such that you can then focus on the lower interest rate. And again, the key point here is about the interest rate. If you have a very high interest rate loan, it means that that amount that you have as your balance is increasing. But if you are able to bring down the interest rate, then the rate of increase changes. And as long as the rate of increase is not too much, then and you are making your repayment or even overpayment, then you can tackle the debt much quicker. So again, when you come to your loan or your debt, that's why the first step about writing down the debt, writing down the interest rate becomes very important in choosing the strategy for you to adopt going forward. And if you have any credit card, make sure that you are paying more than the minimum balance. And again, the best way to use a credit card is to pay off the balance in full by the end of the month. Very, very important. Now, I know if you are there are people who at this point you have this set of loans and different types of debt, and they're thinking, how do I best approach it? It's so complex scenario. Again, this is where you can find or seek guidance. Bible says in Proverbs 11 verse 14, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in the abundance of counselors, there is safety. And there are so many UK debt charities that you can talk to. For example, Christian Against Poverty, they also provide debt advice. Step Change provides debt advice. Citizen Advice Bureau, they provide debt advice. National Debt Line, they provide debt advice. So you can talk to them on the best way to handle your debt. Now, it is very important to understand that depending on your nature of debt, they might be suggesting different schemes to you. It is very important that before you accept, make sure you do the research to find out which one works best for you. There are different schemes. For example, the breathing space scheme is the one where you just, for a period of time, you will not have to, you can be paying back your debt, or you can choose not to pay back, but the lenders will not reach out to you for 60 days. So it means that if you are having financial anxiety, mental health crisis as a result of your debt, then you can get a temporary breathing space such that lenders will not reach out to you, or your creditors will not reach out to you, and then you can use that period to plan on how to approach your debt. Then there are others like the debt management plan. Here there is an agreement between you and the lender, but then you have to maybe go through an individual another debt organization like Step Change. They can take on your debt, they pay your lender, and then you only, or your creditors, and then you only have one payment to make every month so that you can clear the debt. And these are options where you are able to pay your debt. Now, there are people who, as a result of life changes, they cannot pay their debt. Then those people have to go through a form of insolvency, where they have the individual voluntary arrangement, where your debt basically can go away. But what that means is for the next 6 years, you might not be able to get any form of debt. So it means that your credit rating is already hammered. So you might not be able to, even if your income increases within that period, you might not be able to get any form of credit, whether you want to buy a house or you want to, get a credit card or whatever, because you have gone through a form of insolvency. And that's why most times, if you want to get any form of credit, they ask you, even for car insurance, they ask you, has anyone declared insolvency in the past 5 years or 6 years? Again, that stays on the record for a long time. So it is very important that you take advice before you decide to go through any of this approach. Again, it is very key to take some advice using any of the organizations I mentioned earlier. Now, the very last aspect, which again, I know time is already far gone, is on how to build your credit score. Now, credit score or credit rating, like I mentioned, is that information that tells your creditors or your lender what your credit rating or worthiness will be. And here you can check what your credit worthiness is by looking at your credit report. So here you can request for your credit report from Experian, Equifax, or even TransUnion. These are the three main ones in the UK that you can get your credit report from. Now, statutorily, you can get one of your report every year. However, if you want to get your report on a consistent basis, then you can use some of the apps that gives you your credit report, like ClearScore, Credit Karma, or even the Money Saving Expert Credit Club. Now, the truth of this is that these guys will give you your credit report on a regular basis, but sometimes they can also, advertise credit to you. So you must be very careful that in looking at the free reports with these organizations like ClearScore, Credit Karma, you are not you are not enticed into getting more credit because they are telling you that you have a 100% chance, 50% chance, or a very good chance of getting a loan. Now they will advertise because they are credit brokers. You do not have to apply, so you can use those things for free. Now, the other way you can improve your credit rating is to apply to be on the electoral roll. So, if you are from the Commonwealth, for example, even if you are still on a skilled worker or even a student visa, for example, you can still apply to be on the electoral roll, and that's a good advantage because it shows stability, and that can help to improve your credit rating as well. Then if you are if you are new and you've just opened your first account, I think it is a good idea to keep your longest account for a very long time. Now you might not even be using it. I have an account that I opened when I first got to the UK, and that account, even though I still use it, but I would not be closing that account anytime soon because it is my longest credit account, or my longest account. It's a current account rather. It's my longest account, and it has a good contribution to my credit rating, especially in the UK. So keep your longest credit account, or your longest account, for as long as possible. Okay. And again, the credit building the credit worthiness is a gradual process. Stay on top of your payment. Do not overextend yourself with credit. So if you don't need it, don't ask for it, or don't borrow. Just keep living within your means, and pay your bills on time such that you don't get any missed payment, and that can lead to county court judgment on your account. And once that happens, it takes another couple of years to get it fixed. Now you can write to the lender and go through a process that you might be fortunate if you pay the amount, then they can take the judgment off you, but it's a process. And without having to deal with that stress, it's better to just make sure you're paying your bills on time. And again, another way to improve or to keep your credit rating is to avoid applying for excess credit. Again, if you can, within the space of 6 months, make sure there is not more than one ad search on your credit. Now, there is a difference between a soft search and a hard search. Now, hard search is when you are applying for credit. If you are just doing comparison, maybe insurance, those are soft searches. It doesn't impact your credit rating. But for hard search, you must make sure that you are not getting more than one in every 6 months, thereabout. And if you can, as long as possible, don't apply for any credit. That can also help. And especially if you are looking to buy a house or you're getting a mortgage, it's a good idea for the 6 months before then, don't apply for any form of credit. Then again, maintaining a stable employment and address. So as soon as you change your move house, very important to have your address updated, and that can help you as well in maintaining that consistency. There are people who's gotten county court judgment that has impacted their credit rating because when they moved out, they did not update their address. So keeping a consistent and stable employment and address is very important. Now, the other one is to be very mindful of your financial connection. And this is where, as a couple, if you are married, it's very important that you are interested in what your husband or your wife is doing with their money. Because again, as long as you have a joint bill, joint current account, joint water bill, or broadband, if they miss a payment, it's going to affect you. So it's very important that you are also mindful of what they are, what your husband, your wife, and how well they are doing financially. So it's a joint thing, but then there are ways that you can get disconnected, but then it goes through a number of process again. So it's always very important to be mindful of who you are connected with, and on your credit report, it should also tell you who you are connected with and on which bill, so that you can pay attention to those kind of bill. So again, we are closing. But I think before we go, there are some things that I think we should explore as a timeline to help you and get, you know, move forward. And the first one is to face the truth about every debt and stop avoiding the numbers. So write down your debt, like we mentioned, write down the interest rate, write down the amount, and face the number. Because again, if you can't track it, if you can't measure it, you can't deal with it. Then within this week, right, make a realistic plan. Okay, if you are going to be paying using any, maybe the snowball method or the avalanche method, make a plan. If you want to go through debt consolidation, make sure you have a plan to approach or to face that debt. Otherwise it just keeps building, it just keep accumulating, and it becomes very, very dangerous down the line. Then, as you go, if we are entering into a new month, that's why I have next month there. Choose a repayment system and deal with obvious leaks. For example, every morning at Greg's, it adds up. You might be saying it's just £6, but if you spend £6 a day for 5 days a week, that's 30 pounds. Yeah, is it £30 now? Or it's more than, so you add 5 times 6 is 30, so £30 in a week. Multiply that by 1 month, that's already maybe 120 pounds. In a year, that's already more than £1,000. So again, just monitor those little spending here and there that you think, well, it's just a small amount of money, but these things accumulate and they build up. So over the next quarter, if you don't have an emergency fund, it's very good to start with £1,000, put it somewhere safe, and then you can then begin to build it up over time. And again, strengthen your accountability system. As couples, we talk about money. Don't be there to listen and to engage. Don't just think about it that, oh, are you monitoring me? Again, because you are a team and you are going together. Otherwise, if one is going down, there's a likelihood that they will draw, you will pull the other down. So it's very important that you work together as a team. Then you then need to begin to think of how you move from borrowing to having margin. And here it means that you want to make sure that you are spending less than you make, so that you then have money for saving and investing. If you want to build a generational wealth, then you must have a buffer built into your spending, because without that buffer, it becomes very challenging for you to have a breathing space to do what you need to do with money. Okay, so again, what you need to do: always contextualize your debt. What is the purpose of this debt? Do I have ability to repay? What is the interest rate? And what is the risk? If you lose your job, will you still be able to meet up? If you become sick, will you be able to meet up? So always contextualize this debt such that you are not just accumulating and accumulating debt. Then create a budget, save an emergency fund, so that when there's an emergency, you have something to fall back on. And when you are in doubt, seek counsel, seek professional support. And even at a Keep Steward, we offer free coaching sessions for at least 30 or 45 minutes for individuals, which you can book without paying a dime. Which again, it's something that it's not, I mean, if you go out there, it's going to cost money, but then these are systems that you can take advantage of in order for you to be able to achieve your financial goal. All right. So again, you might have debt, it might just be for a season, but this debt should not define the future. So by attending webinars like this, by putting order into what you do, by being accountable, then you can move your household from financial worry even to the place of having a form of financial peace. And that will be it for tonight. Just to say a very big thank you to everyone who supported us. Again, there are different ways that you can support what we do. Keep us live on air, and we have so many supporters for this month. And again, these are people who we don't have to, or they don't have to, but they choose to buy a £5 ticket for this event. Just to say a very big thank you to you. And yes, thank you to everyone for coming out as well. In closing, just to remind everyone, again, we have a YouTube platform where we try to post videos, and this webinar will be made available on YouTube as well. So please, if you have not subscribed, do well to subscribe. We have other resources. Again, this screenshot is from a while ago, but then there are more videos there on that platform for you. And also, if you would like to have a discussion, I've tried to answer some of the questions without asking for too much details, but it's possible for us to have a one-to-one where we look at the numbers together, so you can book for a coaching and stewardship review session with me. I do it on a Thursday and a Sunday, and it's free to you. So you can book in, go to our website. There's a link there for you to book as well. And also we have some from services that we offer: speaking engagement, consultancy services to different organizations, and even churches. And again, when we do this, we don't say you have to pay us X amount of money. Again, it's just for the common good. And again, that's what we do. And as an organization that keeps stewards, we want you to learn, to apply what you have learned, to grow, and then use the growth, the resources that you have now to serve other people, essentially for the growth and for the expansion of God's kingdom. And just to say again, a very big thank you to everyone who has come in tonight. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the top. Keep making progress. And again, God bless everyone. Thank you.